There's a little girl holding a violin with no strings, and somehow it still makes a sound. That was the moment Jack realized this cabin wasn't empty. Not really. It had just been waiting like all broken things do for someone willing to stay. Before we begin, if you find comfort in quiet stories like this one, consider leaving a like or even subscribing. It helps us keep the fire going for you and for the next listener who might need it. Now back to the cabin. The first thing Jack Ellery did when the car skidded to a stop was laugh. Not because it was funny, nothing about the moment was funny. Not the bald tires or the gas tank blinking empty. Not the ice-crusted road behind them or the fact that Hazel, his 8-year-old daughter, had gone quiet in the back seat, hands pressed flat to her stuffed otter. But because sometimes when life corners you in the middle of a frozen forest, laughter is the only thing that doesn't cost more than you have. "All right," Jack muttered, shifting into park. "I guess Pine Hollow it is." Outside, snow fell in long, slanting sheets. Not gentle flakes, but the kind that came sideways, driven by wind. Pines leaned under the weight of it, their trunks dark with wet. The road behind them was already fading into white. Hazel didn't speak. She was used to sudden stops, to long stretches of silence between towns. But she tilted her head, peering out the window at a wooden sign half buried in snow. "Welcome to Pine Hollow. Est, 1884. A quiet place to begin." Jack stared at the slogan for a long moment. "I don't think that's false advertising," he said. Hazel said nothing. She hugged the otter tighter. Jack exhaled and opened the door. The wind slapped his face like it was mad at him personally. He stepped out, boots crunching into the snowdrift. A brittle smell hung in the air, pine, rust, and something faintly sweet, like old sap or forgotten apples. The engine gave a final wheeze before dying completely. He looked around. No houses in sight, no signal bars on his phone. Just a narrow road curling through the woods, a gas station long behind them, and ahead. Nothing but trees. Nothing but trees, and just visible through the snow, a slanted rooftop tucked between two hills. Smoke-blackened wood, no lights. A building that had been forgotten by whoever built it. Hazel opened her door carefully. "Dad?" Her voice was small, wind-swallowed. "We're okay," he said. He had said that a lot lately. She got out slowly, dragging her backpack behind her. Her boots sank ankle-deep with every step. Jack slung their duffel bag over one shoulder, adjusted his coat, and took her hand. They walked toward the dark shape ahead. As they moved, Jack kept glancing around, half expecting someone to yell, to demand they leave, but no one came. No tire tracks, no footprints. Just the crunch of snow and the creak of trees bowing to the storm. When they reached the structure, he realized it was bigger than it first seemed. A cabin old, abandoned maybe. The door hung crooked on its hinges. A window was cracked, the glass fogged from inside with years of dust. But the roof, though sagging, held, and the frame was solid. Jack tried the handle, locked. Hazel looked up at him. "Is it breaking in?" she asked. "If no one lives here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he checked the window nearest the door. The latch had long since rusted through. He used the flat of his hand to push it open. The cold inside bit harder than the storm. The air was dry, still, and thick with the smell of old wood and ash. But it was shelter. And shelter was enough. He helped Hazel through the window, then followed. Inside, the room was dark except for the gray light leaking through frosted panes. There was a stone fireplace in the corner, a stack of toppled chairs and what might have been a table once now warped and bowed. A calendar hung on the far wall, the pages curled and yellowed. The year was 1997. Hazel took off her gloves and rubbed her hands together. Her cheeks were red with cold, but her eyes were calm. "Do we get to stay?" she asked. Jack looked around. There were no signs of anyone, no warmth, no sound except the wind pressing against the walls. "For now," he said. He took the few logs from the duffel he'd picked them up from a roadside stop 2 towns back. Set them in the hearth, tore a newspaper into kindling and sparked the lighter. The flame hesitated, then caught. The fire made no promises, but it burned, and that, Jack thought, was enough for tonight. The fire crackled like it had been waiting for them. It wasn't much, 3 narrow logs, a scatter of newspaper scraps, and a handful of dry pine needles Hazel had found in her backpack. But it pushed back the cold just enough. Shadows danced on the walls, jagged and soft, while the wind howled beyond the cracked windows like something ancient and tired. Jack sat on the dusty floor, knees drawn up, staring into the flames. Hazel leaned against him, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of mothballs and old cedar. "It smells like someone's attic," she whispered. He smiled without teeth. "Better than the back seat." She nodded. "Can we stay here tomorrow too?" Jack didn't answer immediately. His mind was running through the numbers gas, food, what was left in the glove compartment, what wasn't. But he didn't want to lie, and he didn't want to tell the truth either. Not tonight. "We'll see," he said. Hazel accepted that. She always did. They explored the cabin in quiet, careful steps. The space was just one large room with a half-collapsed loft above, a ladder missing its bottom 3 rungs, and a built-in shelf sagging under a forgotten stack of firewood. Dust clung to everything. Even the air tasted gray. But there were signs this place had mattered once. A hand-carved coat hook shaped like a fox, a cracked mirror with a frame made of braided twine, and a kettle left neatly on the stove as if its owner had intended to return in a few minutes and simply hadn't. Hazel found a trunk near the hearth, the lid swollen with damp and time. She tugged it open and discovered an old wool sweater, far too large for her but thick and warm. She pulled it over her coat without a word. Jack rifled through nearby cabinets, nothing edible. A chipped tin cup, a rusted can opener, a book with no cover, its pages curled and spotted with mold. He set it down without opening it. They ate the last of the crackers from the car and split a peanut butter packet Hazel had saved from a diner 3 days ago. She insisted Jack take more than half. He pretended not to notice. When the fire began to dim, Jack fed it the final bits of kindling and sat back, watching the glow fade from orange to deep gold. Hazel lay curled beneath the old blanket, her head resting on a folded coat. The stuffed otter was tucked between her arms. She was half asleep, her lips forming silent words, prayers, or dreams, he couldn't tell which. Jack stood and moved to the window. Outside, the snow was still falling, quieter now, like the forest had decided to breathe slower. The world was muffled. Time itself seemed to soften at the edges. He touched the glass. It was ice cold. This wasn't a place to stay. Not really. It was a pause in the middle of nowhere, a forgotten cabin on a road not even marked on the map. But the roof held. The fire burned. And Hazel was warm. That was enough for tonight. He turned back and saw her watching him, eyes open now, barely visible in the firelight. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "You looked sad." "I was just thinking." "About what?" He hesitated, then said, "How something broken can still keep you warm." Hazel thought about that for a long time. Then softly, "Like us?" Jack felt his chest tighten. Not the sharp kind of pain, but the deep, slow ache of love held too tightly. He walked back over and sat beside her. "Not like us," he said. "Exactly us." She smiled with her eyes, then drifted off. Jack stayed awake long after the fire began to die. Outside, the snow piled silently against the door. Inside, a man who had nothing left built a home, if only for one night. Morning came slowly, like it wasn't sure if it should. Light seeped in through the warped window panes, pale gray and hushed. The fire had long gone out, leaving only ash and the faint smell of pine smoke clinging to the air. Jack woke to the sound of nothing. No cars, no birds, just the weight of stillness, like the whole forest was holding its breath. He sat up stiffly. His back ached from the floor. His coat had slipped halfway off during the night. Beside him, Hazel was still asleep, her small hands clutching the stuffed otter, her hair tangled in soft curls over one eye. Jack stood, careful not to wake her, and stepped toward the door. Cold crept up through the floorboards. He rubbed warmth back into his arms and pulled the door open with both hands. The wind had calmed overnight, but snow had kept falling. Now it blanketed everything in clean, silent white. The woods looked almost untouched, peaceful in a way that didn't quite feel real. Then he saw it. Just outside the door, on the top step of the porch, stacked neatly, with intention, was a small bundle of firewood. Dry wood, cut and tied with twine. Not there the night before. Jack stepped out onto the porch. The snow was soft and shallow under his boots. He crouched beside the bundle, touched it. The wood was fresh, no frost, no damp. Whoever had left it had done so early, maybe just before sunrise. He scanned the woods, no footprints in sight, but he knew someone had been here. Someone had watched them arrive. Watched him fumble with the fire, watched Hazel curl into sleep. And instead of calling the sheriff or running them off or boarding the place up, they left firewood. Jack stared out into the trees. The stillness now felt different, charged somehow. Not threatening, but not harmless either. Like something just beyond the tree line was still watching, measuring. He carried the bundle inside. Hazel was awake now, blinking slowly in the fireless room. "Someone brought this," Jack said. She sat up. "Who?" He shook his head. "No clue, they didn't leave a note." Hazel looked at the bundle, then at him. "Maybe they used to live here. Maybe. Maybe they still do." Jack didn't answer. He rebuilt the fire, carefully, dry wood now, not scraps, and struck a match. The flame took quickly, licking up the bark, bright and eager. The cabin lit up with new life. Hazel pulled the blanket tighter and scooted closer. Outside the window, the trees stood silent, unmoving, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Someone had come close enough to the door to help, close enough to care, close enough to leave, see, and say nothing. Maybe they'd be back. He didn't know if that comforted him or not. The cabin was barely visible through the trees. Just a slant of roof and a faint wisp of smoke curling from the old chimney. From where they stood on a ridge above the tree line, behind a stand of furs, Rowan Llewellyn could see everything. The footprints in the snow, the small flickering light in the window, the man moving inside with deliberate, tired gestures. And the child curled close to the hearth like a kitten drawn to warmth it didn't trust yet. "He got the fire going," she said quietly. Wren, standing behind her with arms crossed, made no effort to hide her disapproval. "Of course he did," Wren replied. "Thieves are resourceful." Rowan didn't take her eyes off the cabin. "He's not a thief." Wren stepped forward, her boots crunching softly on the frost. "Ro, he broke into our cabin, our family's cabin, the one we agreed no one else would ever set foot in again. We never made that agreement." "I did," Wren snapped. "You just nodded and disappeared for 6 years." Rowan turned then, slowly, calmly. "You stopped coming here before I left." "That place is not a sanctuary anymore," Wren said. "It's a ruin. It's a wound." Rowan didn't argue. She knew better. Some things don't need agreement to be true. Still, she looked back at the cabin. There was something about the man, Jack. She'd overheard his name once at the post office weeks ago. Not from him, of course. He didn't seem the talking type, but word in town moved quietly like sap in cold treant. People noticed a stranger with a child in a car full of clutter. People always noticed. He's just trying to get through the storm, Rowan said. He has a daughter. I know. I saw them yesterday. She was carrying that stuffed otter, remember? Looked like she hadn't had a warm bed in weeks. So what do you want to do? I want them out. Rowan raised a brow. And then what? You going to patch the roof, rebuild the floor, air out the attic full of mold? That's not the point. No, it is, Rowan interrupted gently. You want them gone because this place still hurts, not because he's dangerous. Wren fell silent. Her breath showed white in the air. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, but not from the cold. I don't want them living in her space, Wren said finally. Her voice dropped, not in volume but in force. This place belonged to someone, and it ended terribly. Rowan nodded. Yes, it did. A gust of wind swept across the ridge, carrying the smell of wood smoke and pine sap, the kind of scent that lingered in memory longer than it did on clothing. They stood in silence a while longer, the cabin below flickering softly in the snowbound clearing. No movement now, just the suggestion of life, of warmth, fragile and borrowed. I left them some firewood, Rowan said. Wren didn't look at her. I know. You didn't stop me. I wanted to. Rowan turned to her sister and for the first time in years reached out. Just a hand, brushing Wren's sleeve, tentative, human. You don't have to forgive me, Rowan said, but maybe you can forgive the cabin. Wren looked away toward the trees, the sky, anywhere but at her sister. I don't forgive either of you, she whispered. Not yet. And she walked back down the ridge, leaving only her boot prints behind. Rowan stayed a moment longer, watching the cabin, watching the father she didn't know, and the girl wrapped in wool and firelight. She whispered something into the wind. It had no words, only weight. Then she followed Wren into the trees. The snow had stopped, but the cold stayed behind. Jack stood on the porch roof, knees braced wide, hammer in hand. The wood beneath his boots groaned every time he shifted. He was patching the worst of the leak sections where ice had opened long cracks in the shingles and water had seeped down into the rafters. It wasn't elegant work. He didn't have the right tools or the right wood, but there were fallen branches nearby and a few old planks salvaged from a collapsed shed 50 yards from the cabin. He worked with the same steady patience he used for everything these days. Quiet, no rush, just one nail at a time. Below him, Hazel sat on the snow-covered step, drawing lines in the frost with her mitten. Her cheeks were flushed pink. Her breath came in little clouds. She didn't complain about the cold, didn't ask when they were leaving. That worried him more than anything. You okay down there? He called. She looked up, squinting against the sky. Fine. Let me know if you get too cold. I like it, she said. It smells like a treehouse. He paused at that, then went back to hammering. By mid-morning, the worst leaks were sealed temporarily at least. He climbed down slowly, rubbing his wrists. The motion was familiar, but the muscles weren't what they used to be. Once he'd built a treehouse for Hazel behind their first apartment. It took him 2 weekends and half his savings, but she used to call it her castle. He hadn't thought of that in months. Inside the cabin, it was warmer than the day before. The fire still glowed faintly thanks to the dry wood someone he still didn't know who had left. Hazel had been tending it like it was a living thing. She had disappeared into the corner cabinet now. the one with the loose hinged doors and a handle worn smooth with time. Jack could hear her talking to herself, a running whisper of questions and commentary. Then, "Dad? Yeah? I found something." He walked over, brushing sawdust off his jeans. Hazel stood beside the open cabinet door, pointing to a shelf lined with folded cloth. He reached in and pulled one out, a blanket, thick woolen, olive green with brown stripes. Dusty but clean, someone had folded it with care. Tucked between the folds was a single cedar chip, brittle and dry, but still fragrant. Hazel reached for it instinctively. Jack handed it over. She hugged it to her chest, eyes wide. "Can I keep it?" "It's not really ours. No one's using it," she said softly. Jack looked around the cabin. He'd seen no sign of recent habitation. No food, no clothes, no candles or tools, just the firewood, just the strange, quiet kindness of someone who hadn't knocked or spoken or claimed the place. He nodded. "Okay, yeah, you can." Hazel beamed. She took the blanket and spread it near the hearth, then sat down cross-legged and wrapped it around her shoulders. The color made her look even smaller, swallowed up by its weight. Jack crouched beside her. "It's warm," she whispered. "Looks like it. Someone left it for us," she said with certainty. He didn't argue, not because he believed her, but because sometimes belief is its own kind of warmth. They sat like that for a while, just the fire, the ticking of old wood adjusting in the warmth, and the distant groan of trees shifting in the wind. After a time, Hazel pulled the blanket tighter around her and asked, "Do you think anyone misses this place?" Jack blinked. "What do you mean?" "It feels like someone used to love it, but not anymore." He thought of the firewood, the clean blanket, the way everything here felt paused, not abandoned. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think someone does." Hazel looked at the window. Maybe they're just waiting for the right moment to come back. Jack didn't answer, but he watched the snow outside and wondered if, somewhere beyond the trees, someone was waiting for them to leave. Hazel found the photograph while looking for matches. She had seen Jack do it 100 times. Reach into the narrow crevice beneath the hearth, where old things collected like dust. He kept a few paper scraps there now, a folded napkin, the stub of a burnt matchbook. She wanted to help, so while he was outside checking the car battery again, she crouched in front of the fireplace and reached into the gap. Her fingers touched something dry, thin, papery but stiff. She tugged carefully. It slid out slowly, corners catching on the stone. It was a photograph, small, about the size of her hand. Curled at the edges and yellowed with age, but not torn. On it, a young woman stood beneath a pine tree, her arms wrapped gently around a violin. Her face was half shadowed by the brim of a winter hat, but her eyes were steady, clear, and soft. Hazel stared at the picture. The woman didn't smile, but she didn't look sad either. She looked still, like someone who didn't need to say much to be heard. Hazel wiped the soot off the edges with her sleeve. Then she turned it over. The back was blank except for 3 words written in pencil. "Don't forget her." Hazel's heart beat a little faster. She looked around as if someone might be watching, then tiptoed to the shelf near the hearth, the one with the old teacup and the dusty clock that no longer ticked. She placed the photo there, upright between the teacup and a chipped wooden box. Jack came in a minute later, his boots heavy with half-melted snow. "Battery's dead," he said. "Totally frozen over. We're stuck at least another day." Hazel pointed to the shelf. "I found her." He followed her gaze. "The picture?" She was hiding behind the fireplace. Jack stepped closer, peered at the image. "Huh. Do you think she used to live here? Maybe. Do you think she still does?" Jack hesitated. "I don't think so." Hazel frowned. She looks kind. He nodded. She does. There was a silence between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Jack took off his coat and sat beside the fire. Hazel joined him, blanket still wrapped tight around her. She kept glancing at the picture as if expecting the woman to move or speak. She's holding a violin, Hazel said. Good eye. I saw one in the shed behind the cabin. Jack turned. Really? She nodded. It's broken. The strings are all messed up. We'll check it out tomorrow. Hazel leaned against his side. If we fix it, maybe she'll come back. Jack looked at her. Maybe she never left, he said quietly. Hazel didn't reply. She was already drifting toward sleep again, the way children do when the world feels safe enough, if only for a little while. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the sky turned from silver to the color of ash. The photograph stood on the shelf, watching over them. And in the space between one breath and the next, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The shed had nearly disappeared under the snow. Hazel spotted it first, just a warped shape buried in white, like part of the forest had slouched down and decided to sleep for the season. The roof sagged on one side, and a single shutter clung to the window like it hadn't quite given up yet. Can we look inside? She asked, already half running toward it. Jack hesitated. They were low on firewood, and if nothing else, the shed might offer dry planks, maybe even something worth burning. He followed her through knee-deep snow, boots cracking through the crust of ice. The door gave way with a push, not locked, just swollen with time. Inside, darkness, the sharp sting of old rot and the faint metallic smell of rust. Sunlight filtered in through broken slats, painting stripes across piles of forgotten tools, rusted hinges, splintered crates. Hazel stepped in first, her breath turning silver in the cold air. She moved carefully, touching nothing, as if she sensed the shed remembered more than it should. Jack poked around one corner, lifting aside a torn tarp and finding old nails, cracked jars, a coil of wire. Nothing useful. Then he heard her voice. Dad, look. She held it in both hands, awkward, reverent. A violin. Dusty, one string missing, another barely clinging to its peg. The wood had dulled to a soft brown gray, and there was a fine crack along the back. But it was still whole, still unmistakable. Jack blinked. That's a violin. Hazel nodded. Like in the picture. He stepped closer, reached for it. May I? She passed it to him without a word. He held it up, turned it over in his hands. The weight surprised him, lighter than he expected, but heavier somehow in meaning. There was no case, no bow, just the instrument, abandoned but not broken. The thought came quickly, without malice. It would burn well. He hated himself for thinking it, but it was true. The wood was dry, solid, one match, and they'd have 15 minutes of clean flame. Hazel seemed to read his mind. You're not going to burn it, are you? Jack looked at her. Her eyes weren't accusing, just quiet, trusting. I don't know, he said honestly. It used to sing, she said. You shouldn't burn something that used to sing. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Outside, a breeze kicked up, stirring loose snow off the roof. It slid down in soft chunks. The sound reminded him of curtains being drawn in a quiet house. He looked back at the violin, turned it once more. Then, almost without thinking, he brushed a thumb across the hollow body. A faint vibration answered. No music, just a memory of it. He handed it back to Hazel. We'll keep it, he said. Her shoulders relaxed. Even if it doesn't work? Especially if it doesn't. She smiled, and for a moment the shed didn't feel like a graveyard. It felt like a gallery of lost things, waiting. They carried the violin back to the cabin together. Hazel wrapped it in the green wool blanket like it was something sacred. She placed it gently beneath the photograph like one belonged to the other. Jack watched her from the corner, arms crossed, unsure whether he felt proud or afraid, maybe both. That night, the wind returned, harder this time. But the fire held longer. Jack fed it with broken chair legs and rotted floorboards, careful to leave the violin untouched. When Hazel fell asleep, he sat alone by the fire, staring at the instrument across the room. Its shadow flickered against the wall, still, waiting. He didn't know why he'd kept it. Only that he couldn't bring himself to destroy something that had once made sound out of silence. And somewhere, deep in the cabin's bones, something softened. Jack knelt in front of the hearth with a brush, a bucket, and two raw, chapped hands. The stonework was older than the cabin, maybe. It had been blackened with soot and years of silence, the kind that settled like dust and didn't leave easy. The hearth hadn't seen real care in a long time, but now it had someone kneeling in front of it, scrubbing each groove like it mattered. Hazel sat nearby on the floor, watching with quiet interest, her chin resting on her knees. The violin, wrapped in the green blanket, sat beside her like a companion too fragile for words. Jack dipped the brush again and scraped gently along the mortar. Ash flaked off. Bits of charcoal crumbled away. He reached into the crevices and pulled out what looked like an old nail twisted with rust. "This fireplace is a mess," he muttered. "You're fixing it," Hazel said. "I'm trying to." "It's already better." He paused, looked at her. She meant it. Not as comfort, not as praise, just a fact, as if she could see something he hadn't noticed yet. He returned to work. There was a rhythm to it: scrub, rinse, scrape, repeat. The repetition warmed his hands, gave him something to do besides count how many cans of food they had left or guess how long before the gas station restocked propane. He cleaned with focus, not desperation, like the act of restoring something small might tip the balance of everything else. When the stone was clear enough to show its true color, an earthy reddish gray, he stepped back. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean. He built the fire slowly this time, not out of urgency, but care. Kindling first, twigs Hazel had gathered from the dry patch under the shed, then the small logs from their unknown visitor, stacked like bones in a precise shape. He crumpled the last sheet of newspaper and set it beneath, then paused with the lighter in hand. Hazel scooted closer. "Want me to do it?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "No, I think I need to." He struck the lighter. The flame flickered, uncertain. He cupped it, lowered it toward the paper, held his breath. It caught, a soft whoosh. A moment later, the wood cracked, popped, then sighed like it, too, had been waiting for permission to breathe again. Jack leaned back on his heels, watching. The fire climbed, slow but determined. Light filled the room, low and golden, brushing over the walls and furniture like a memory trying to return. Shadows pulled long. The photograph on the shelf gleamed faintly in the warmth. Hazel reached her hands toward the flame. "It smells good," she said. "Like what?" "Like someone made a promise here a long time ago." Jack looked at her. She didn't explain further, just held her palms out and closed her eyes. He turned back to the fire. The warmth crawled up his arms, into his chest, loosening something there that had been locked for too long. This was not their home. Not yet, maybe never, but he'd built a fire in a place where nothing had burned for years. That had to mean something. Outside, the wind howled again, but now it sounded different. Less like warning, more like a lullaby sung from a distance, and inside the fire burned steady. Not just heat, not just light, but a beginning. The knock didn't sound like a knock. It was softer than that, just a faint thump, like a breeze had pushed something gently against the door. Jack barely heard it over the fire, but Hazel, half asleep on the floor, lifted her head. "Someone's there," she whispered. He stood, stepped over to the door, and opened it slowly. Snow had started again. Flurries, soft and directionless, turning the world outside into a slow-motion dream. The air was sharp, the kind that cut deep into your lungs and stayed there. At his feet, resting neatly on the top step, was a small canvas bag. No note, no footprints, no sound in the trees. Jack looked around. No figures in the distance, no movement. The woods were still, watching. He crouched and brought the bag inside. Hazel sat up straighter as he opened it. Inside, wrapped in old linen, were 2 pairs of wool gloves, hand-stitched, warm, one adult-sized, one child-sized, and a tin of hot chocolate, worn but sealed. Hazel gasped softly. "Is it from the firewood person?" Jack stared at the items. He touched the gloves, real wool, thick, too careful to be store-bought. The kind someone made slowly, probably while sitting near a fire much like theirs. "I think so," he said. Hazel reached for the smaller gloves. They slid over her fingers perfectly. She grinned. Jack pulled out the tin, turned it in his hands. No label, just a bit of tape over the lid. Someone had gone out of their way to prepare this, quietly, an offering with no claim. "Can we make it?" Hazel asked. Jack hesitated, then nodded. He boiled snow in the kettle they'd found tucked behind the stove, stirred in the chocolate. The smell filled the cabin almost instantly, deep, rich, real. It didn't smell like survival. It smelled like something made for joy. They drank in silence. Hazel's legs tucked under the blanket, her cheeks pink from the firelight. Jack let the warmth settle into his hands, up his arms into his chest. He hadn't had hot chocolate in years, not since Hazel's mother. Not since they used to sit on cold porches with mugs and promises that everything would turn out fine. He finished slowly, savoring the last sip, then looked toward the door. No one came. No one claimed the gesture, just like the firewood, just like the blanket, and now, the gloves. Someone out there was watching, not to scare them, not to control them, but to help in the quietest way possible. Jack didn't know what kind of person did that anymore, but he hoped deep down that maybe he'd get the chance to thank them. Hazel set her mug down and whispered, "We're not alone here, are we?" Jack looked at her. "No," he said, "we're not." The door creaked just slightly as Rowan eased it open. She stepped inside with the kind of silence learned from grief, the silence of someone who'd long since stopped slamming doors or asking for permission. Her boots left faint trails across the floor, melting snow into soft puddles behind her. She paused just inside the threshold, letting the scent hit her. Smoke, wool, old pine, dust, and something else. Something she hadn't felt in this place in years. Life. The cabin looked both the same and entirely different. The same cracked walls, the same sag in the left window pane. But now, there were signs of presence, a blanket left folded near the hearth, a mug on the shelf, 2 pairs of gloves drying by the fire. Someone had rebuilt the flame. It danced now, low and steady inside a freshly cleaned hearth. Rowan let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She stepped forward. No one was home. She knew that before opening the door, she'd watched the man and the child hike down the trail earlier. Likely toward the edge of town, supplies maybe, or escape. Either way, she had time. She crossed the room and sat in the same place she always had years ago. Cross-legged in front of the fire, the way her wife used to sit, violin across her lap, bow balanced gently against her knee. Rowan stared into the flames. It took a moment before the words came. She didn't raise her voice. She wasn't speaking to be heard, just to say it aloud once. "I thought I'd forgotten how this room feels when it's warm." The fire crackled softly in response. She rubbed her hands together, then rested them on her knees. "You'd hate it, you know. Someone else living here, sitting in your spot, touching your things." Her eyes flicked to the shelf where the photo still stood. Her wife, frozen in time, arms around her violin, standing beneath that winter tree. Rowan smiled, small and sad. I used to hate it too. The wind moved outside the windows, low and restless. Rowan leaned back, the wooden floor groaning under her weight. It felt more solid than she remembered. Maybe because someone had dared to believe it could be. I thought I was doing the right thing. Wren walking away and me not stopping her. Letting this place rot like it meant something secret. Like decay was a form of reverence. She shook her head. It wasn't. It was just cowardice. The flames dimmed slightly, flickering blue for half a second before climbing again. She reached for the poker and gave the logs a small nudge. The fire flared. You wouldn't like him, the man. He's too quiet, stares too long, looks like he's carrying something he won't put down. But the girl, she's something else. She found your violin. Her voice caught. She didn't try to fix it, didn't even ask if it worked. She just wrapped it up and placed it beside your photo like it had always been there. Rowan let that sit, the memory of it. I think she understands something most of us forget. She stared at the fire a while longer, then slowly stood. She didn't take anything, didn't move the photo, didn't leave a note. But before she turned to go, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small tin-dried lavender and crushed mint, bundled together in wax paper. She placed it on the mantel beside the mug, a silent offering, a memory folded into scent. Then she walked to the door, paused with one hand on the frame. She whispered, "Thank you for letting me sit here again," and slipped back into the snow. The general store was almost empty. A bell jingled faintly as Jack pushed the door open, snow melting off his shoulders and dripping onto the welcome mat. The place smelled like dry wood, engine grease, and something vaguely medicinal. It reminded him of waiting rooms and gas stations, a familiar emptiness. He scanned the aisles, shelves half-stocked, some canned food, matches, salt, and 2 overripe bananas by the register. It would have to do. He grabbed a few basics: powdered milk, a small loaf of stale bread, 2 protein bars priced like they were made of gold. Hazel had asked for hot tea. He found a dusty box of chamomile near the back and added it to the basket. Then he heard a voice behind him. "You're the one staying in the cabin." Jack turned. A woman stood near the counter holding a tin of soup. Her hair was pinned up under a knit hat, face pale with the kind of bone-deep tired that couldn't be fixed with sleep. Her coat was too thin for the weather, her boots worn but polished. She looked like someone who belonged to a different season, one that hadn't arrived yet. Jack gave a small nod. "Didn't realize it was off limits." She shrugged. "It's not." He studied her for a beat. "You know it?" "I know what happened in it." There was something sharp in her tone, but not cruel. Just old, like a wound picked open too many times. Jack said nothing. The woman stepped forward, set her soup on the counter, then glanced at him again. "You fixed the fireplace?" He nodded. "Needed it." She would have liked that. Jack frowned. "She?" The woman didn't answer right away. She picked up the soup again, turned it in her hands like it might give her better words. Then she said, almost absent-mindedly, "It's strange, isn't it? How a place can remember someone better than a person can." Jack said, "What happened there?" The woman looked at him fully now. Her eyes were a storm of things unsaid, grief maybe, or guilt, or something older than both. "She died there," she said plainly. "Years ago, alone." Silence fell hard between them. Jack swallowed. "Your family?" The woman nodded once. "I'm sorry," he said. She smiled then, not warm but not cold either. Just tired, like someone saying goodbye to a memory that kept showing up uninvited. "She loved firelight," she said. She said it made silence feel less empty. Jack nodded, unsure what else to offer. It still does. She turned to go, but before she reached the door, she paused, her hand resting on the frame just like Rowan's had. She never played the violin again after that winter, the woman said quietly, but she kept it near her like she was waiting for someone else to make the sound for her. Jack furrowed his brow. Was she waiting for someone to come back? The woman didn't answer. She just looked over her shoulder and said, "Some people don't wait. They haunt." Then she stepped out into the snow, the door shutting behind her with a hush-like final breath. Jack stood there a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in slow. He didn't know who she was, not exactly, but he knew what she carried, and somehow, he knew it was now in his hands too. Hazel liked unpacking small things. The big jobs hauling firewood, clearing snow off the porch, those were for Dad. But small things, folding blankets, sorting matches, arranging the shelf by the hearth just so, those were hers. So when Jack returned from town and handed her the box of chamomile tea, she accepted it like a gift from another world. "It's old," he warned. "Might taste like the shelf it was sitting on." Hazel grinned. "Still smells like flowers?" She took the box over to the little wooden table by the window, where she liked to pretend it was a kitchen again. The box was dented on one corner, the cardboard faded, the flap peeled open with a faint crackle. Inside, the crinkled paper envelopes of tea bags, 10 of them, maybe 11. And something else, a scrap of folded paper tucked between the last 2 bags. Hazel paused. She pulled it out slowly, thin, yellowed, soft at the edges like it had been touched many times. Someone had written on it in blue pen, careful handwriting, not perfect but neat, a little slanted, a little tired. She read it once, then again slower. "If you're reading this, I hope you're safe. This place never stopped being kind. It was just waiting for someone who knew how to listen. Let the fire burn, and don't throw away the broken things. They're where the warmth hides." Hazel didn't move. Her hands felt warmer than they should. Her chest, too, like the words had settled somewhere deeper than her lungs. "Dad," she called gently. "Come here." Jack was kneeling near the hearth, sorting through kindling. He looked up and crossed the room in a few steps. She handed him the note. He read it once, then held it longer than he meant to. "Was it in the box?" he asked. She nodded. "In with the tea." He sat down beside her, still staring at the words. "Let the fire burn. Don't throw away the broken things." He didn't recognize the handwriting, but it didn't matter. It wasn't for a name. It was for whoever needed it. Hazel leaned her head against his arm. "Do you think it's for us?" Jack looked around the cabin, at the rebuilt fire, at the photo, at the violin still cradled in its blanket. "I think it already was," he said. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Soft, like permission. Inside they made tea, and the fire burned on. Hazel wandered the woods with her gloves on backward. She said it helped her think better, like the world was just different enough through misplaced thumbs. Jack let her go. It was safe within 100 yards of the cabin, and Hazel always stayed within sight of the porch, close enough to hear him call, far enough to be alone in the way kids sometimes needed. Mid-morning light filtered through the trees in patches. The air was still. Snow clung to the branches like it had been carefully placed there. She walked past the old shed, past the crooked fence half swallowed by the woods, and into a small clearing ringed by birch trees. That's when she saw it, carved low into the bark of one tree just above eye level. 2 letters, RU simple, no hearts, no dates, just the plus sign connecting them like a secret bridge. Hazel brushed her mitten across it, then stood still for a long moment. Later, back in the cabin, she sat on the floor beside the hearth, the fire popping gently beside her. Jack was shaving curls of bark off a log, prepping kindling when she finally spoke. Dad? Hmm? Did people always carve their names into trees when they loved each other? He looked up. Sometimes. Yeah. Why? He thought about that. Because trees last, he said. Longer than paper, longer than memory. People thought maybe if they carved it, it'd stay. Hazel considered that. Did it work? Sometimes, he said. Sometimes not. She was quiet again, then said, I saw one today. Just letters. R plus J. Jack froze only for a moment, but Hazel didn't miss it. Do you think they're still in love? He met her eyes, saw how serious she was, how earnestly she wanted to believe the world was still that simple. I think, he said carefully, that love changes shape. Sometimes it stays, sometimes it goes quiet. She nodded like she understood, even if she didn't. Then, do you think Mom carved our names anywhere? Jack swallowed. His hands slowed. I don't know, he said. Hazel stared into the fire. I think if I loved someone, I'd carve their name in the snow. Why the snow? Because it disappears, but you still remember doing it. Jack smiled, a little broken. She didn't notice she was already curled up again, blanket around her, eyes watching the flames. And the fire kept burning, steady and soft. It was late afternoon when Hazel saw the woman in the trees. Not close, just a shape at first, still and quiet, half blended into the birch trunks. Hazel had come outside to collect fallen twigs for kindling, her mittened hands brushing snow from the bases of trees, humming softly to herself. That's when she noticed the figure. Not moving, not hiding, just there. She didn't call out. The woman stepped forward a few minutes later, slowly, as if not to startle. Her coat was dark green, her scarf a faded red. Her eyes were tired but not unkind. Hazel stood still, clutching her half-full bundle of sticks. Hi, the woman said. Hazel tilted her head. Do you live in the forest? The woman smiled faintly. No, not anymore. There was a silence, not awkward, just unsure of its purpose. You're staying in the cabin? The woman asked. Hazel nodded. Just for a little while. I used to come here when I was your age. Hazel's face lit up. Did you leave the firewood? The woman didn't answer that directly. Instead, she pulled something from the inside of her coat. A small wooden box, smoothed on the edges, stained dark by time and handling. She held it out. For you, she said. Hazel stepped forward carefully. Not afraid, just curious in the deep, observant way only children can be. She opened the box. Inside were 12 crayons, neatly arranged, worn from use but still whole. Real wax. Deep colors. The kind that left bold marks on old paper and smelled faintly of oil and cedar. Hazel looked up. Why? The woman's voice dropped to something softer than snow. Because sometimes you need color before the light comes back. Hazel held the box gently in both hands, as if it might hum. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. Another pause. Then Hazel asked the question that had already bloomed inside her. Did you know the woman in the photo? The woman's breath caught, but only slightly. She crouched down to Hazel's level, eyes level. I did, she said. Was she nice? She was music. Hazel smiled. We found her violin. I know. Hazel hesitated, then said, My dad thought about burning it, but I asked him not to. Because I think even broken things want to be remembered. The woman blinked once hard. You're a good listener, she said. Hazel shrugged. The cabin told me. That made the woman smile. For real this time. She stood again, brushing snow from her knees. I have to go now. Hazel clutched the crayon box. Will you come back? Maybe, the woman said. If the fire keeps burning. She turned, stepped back into the trees. Hazel called after her. Wait, what's your name? The woman didn't stop walking, but her voice floated back through the trees. Tell your dad it doesn't have to stay broken. And then she was gone. Hazel stood there a long moment, holding the crayons to her chest. Then she went inside and began to draw. Not to explain, just to remember. It began with no sound at all. Hazel sat cross-legged near the fire, the violin resting in her lap. The blanket wrapped around her shoulders made her look even smaller, like a quiet question tucked into the corner of a room. She didn't ask permission. She simply lifted the violin. There were no strings, at least, not ones that worked. The bow was missing, long since vanished. But Hazel held the instrument the way it was meant to be held, carefully, with intention. Her left hand under the neck, her right hovering in the air, fingers dancing as if stroking invisible strings. Jack watched from the table, fixing a drawer that refused to stay shut. But something about her posture stopped him. He set the wood down slowly. Hazel tilted her head, closed her eyes, moved her right hand gently as if gliding across air. And that's when Jack heard it. A single note, not sharp, not loud, just there, barely, like the memory of a sound instead of the sound itself. It hung in the room a breath too long, like it didn't want to leave. Hazel kept going, swaying slightly. No real notes followed, but the room shifted. Something opened like a held breath was finally released. Jack blinked, and for a moment the firelight changed. It flickered, but not from the wind, and in that flicker the cabin no longer held just them. It was years ago, but only just. The same cabin, the same fire. And a woman sat in Hazel's place, legs crossed, violin cradled under her chin. Her fingers were sure. Her bow moved slow, then fast, then slow again. She played not to perform, but to speak. She was alive in it. The notes weren't perfect, but they were true. Her eyes never left the fire. Behind her, through the frost-dimmed window, someone watched. Rowan, not moving, barely breathing, standing just beyond the glass, hands in her coat pockets, watching the woman she could no longer reach. She hadn't been invited in that night, so she stayed with the trees and listened. Jack stood now in a half-room, holding two timelines at once, his daughter still swaying with her eyes closed and the ghost of a memory that didn't belong to either of them. When Hazel stopped, the silence afterward felt full, not empty. She lowered the violin, looked up. Jack couldn't speak. I think she was here, Hazel said simply. Jack crossed the room, sat beside her. She was, he said. Not because he knew, but because somehow it felt wrong to say otherwise. Hazel placed the violin gently back in its blanket, and outside, past the window, past the woods, Rowan, older now, stood beneath the same tree she had once watched from. Alone again, eyes closed, listening. The wind came in waves. It hadn't started with a warning. Just a low grumble in the trees, then the sudden rush of white outside the windows, thick, blinding, relentless. Jack had seen storms before. This one felt different, like it meant something. By late afternoon, the world outside had vanished into snow. He moved quickly, stacking firewood near the hearth, checking every window for drafts. Hazel sat wrapped in the wool blanket, watching the flames with quiet attention, her fingers idly tracing the grain of the violin's wooden body. He tried to keep his voice steady. We're going to be fine. Hazel nodded. The fire's strong today. He managed a half smile. Yeah, it is. Then a knock, not soft this time, firm, measured 3 times. Jack froze. Hazel looked up. Who would be out in this? He crossed the room, unlatched the door, and opened it into the storm. 2 women stood there, snow clinging to their coats and hair, cheeks windburned and eyes sharp. One was older, taller, face tense with restraint. The other was smaller, wrapped tight in a scarf, her eyes searching the cabin behind Jack like she was looking for proof of something. Wren and Rowan. He recognized the second woman immediately, the one Hazel had described, the one who left the gloves, the tea, the crayons. The other he had not met, but he could guess who she was. Neither spoke. Finally, Rowan held up a canvas tote bag. We brought antibiotics and blankets. Jack blinked. How did you? You've been coughing, she said. We were close enough to hear it. Wren cut in, voice flat. We didn't come to make conversation, just shelter. Jack stepped aside. They entered without ceremony, bringing a gust of frozen air behind them. The door slammed shut, and for a moment the cabin felt smaller, like it had inhaled too sharply. Hazel sat up. It's you! Rowan offered a faint smile. Hey, sweetheart. Hazel pointed to the bag. You really brought blankets? Wren answered this time, moving to the table and unloading supplies. And cough medicine. For both of you, if he'll take it. Jack raised an eyebrow. You always show up like this? Wren didn't reply. She took off her coat and hung it near the fire, hands steady, jaw tight. Rowan knelt beside Hazel, pulled the medicine out and handed it over. Take this now. You'll sleep easier. Jack took it first, then Hazel. No one argued. The heat from the fire pressed in around them all. Wren stood apart, arms crossed, her gaze never quite resting. Jack finally asked, Why are you really here? Rowan didn't look at her sister. Wren said quietly, Because the cabin is safer than the woods, and sometimes even people with history need shelter. Jack nodded. That makes 4 of us. They sat in silence for a long while. Hazel handed Rowan a cup. It's chamomile. Rowan smiled. You made it? Hazel nodded proudly. With the tea you gave us. Wren's eyes flicked up at that. Jack noticed. Outside the wind howled harder, but inside 4 bodies, 1 fire, a violin resting between lives. And the storm, pressing close against the walls, couldn't quite get in. The storm pressed on through the night, winds whispering against the cabin like old secrets clawing to be heard. But inside, the fire held strong and the room glowed with a soft amber hush. The 4 of them sat close drawn, not by trust, but by need. Hazel curled near the hearth, the green blanket around her shoulders like a borrowed memory. Jack leaned against the wall, legs stretched, eyes half closed. Wren sat stiffly at the table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, always watching. Rowan sat beside Hazel, her posture relaxed, but her gaze heavy with old weight. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full. Then Hazel broke it with a whisper. Who was she? Rowan looked up. The woman in the photo, Hazel added, with the violin. Wren shifted. Jack sat straighter. Rowan glanced at the shelf, at the photo resting just above the firelight. She swallowed, the pause longer than the sentence that followed. Her name was June. Hazel repeated it softly. June. She lived here? Jack asked. Rowan nodded. Built this place, with her hands, every plank, every hinge. She was your... Rowan didn't look away from the flames. She was my wife. Wren stared into her mug. Hazel whispered, She was beautiful. She was music, Rowan said again, then softly, but one day she stopped playing. Jack let the quiet sit. Hazel's hands fidgeted under the blanket. We found her violin. It was broken. I know, Rowan said. She cracked it the last winter she was here. Said it didn't sound like her anymore. Did she want it fixed? Rowan hesitated, then shook her head. She didn't believe in fixing things, not after that year. Ren stood suddenly. I need air. No, you don't, Rowan said gently. You just don't want to hear this part. But Ren was already at the door, opening it just enough to let in the cold. She didn't leave. Just stood facing the dark, letting snow touch her face. Hazel looked between them, then reached into the blanket beside her. She pulled out the violin. Jack stiffened. He hadn't seen her take it from its resting place. But now she held it with care, 2 fingers on the neck, the way Rowan had once described. I tried to fix it, Hazel said. I used glue from the drawer and thread and a paperclip. Rowan raised her eyebrows. A paperclip? To hold the peg in place. There was a beat. Then Rowan smiled. June would have approved. Hazel adjusted her grip, brought the violin under her chin. No bow, no strings except one frayed and out of tune. Jack opened his mouth to stop her, but Rowan raised a hand, just slightly. Hazel closed her eyes. She drew her fingers along the single string. Not the right way, not professional, but with heart. And the note came. One note, low, fragile, real. It hummed into the room like a thread pulled across silence. Jack exhaled. Rowan's shoulders dropped, grief softening into something like peace. Outside, Ren turned back toward the cabin door, and inside, Hazel let the note fade. No one spoke right away. Then Rowan whispered, she would have played again if she'd heard that. Hazel smiled, small and proud. The fire cracked and no one moved. Just 4 people sitting in the warmth of something once broken, now beginning to glow again. The fire burned low, not out, just quiet, like it had drawn closer, as if it, too, was listening. Rowan sat with her back to the wall, legs stretched toward the hearth, hands open in her lap. Ren had returned from the doorway, now sitting stiffly on a stool near the shelves, arms crossed, but her eyes were softer than they'd been in days. Jack sat beside Hazel, both of them silent, waiting. Rowan's voice, when it came, was low, steady, not dramatic, not for effect, just memory uncoiled. She used to play late, always after dinner, after the world got quiet. Never a performance, just breathing, through sound. She glanced at the photo above the mantel. June thought music could hold a house together. She believed in notes more than nails. Ren exhaled, but didn't interrupt. Rowan continued. She wasn't well that winter. Not in a way anyone could see. Her body was fine, but something in her had faded. Her fingers would hesitate at the strings. She'd start to play, then stop, like the music got too close to something she didn't want to feel. Hazel leaned against Jack's arm. No one moved. The snow came early that year, Rowan said. Trapped us in here for weeks. We were running low on firewood and she couldn't get warm. Not really. Even with the fire. Her voice lowered. I didn't know how to help her. I thought if I stayed quiet, she'd come back to herself. Jack nodded barely. She asked me once if I'd still love her if the music left her forever. I told her yes, but I think she didn't believe me. A long pause, then, one morning I went to town for medicine, just for the day. When I came back, the words didn't come easily. She was curled by the hearth, wrapped in the same blanket you're using now. The violin was cracked beside her. The fire had gone out. Rowan looked at Hazel, not with grief, but with something deeper. Recognition. She didn't leave a note, just the silence. Hazel whispered, "Did you try to fix the violin?" I couldn't touch it. Not for years. The room held stillness like breath held tight. Then Ren spoke, quiet, bitter. You shut everything down after that. You wouldn't talk, wouldn't move, wouldn't leave. Rowan looked at her. Ren's voice cracked. I left because I couldn't live in a grave. Rowan's reply was simple. I stayed because I couldn't leave her ghost. The fire popped gently like punctuation. Neither sister looked away. Jack reached for another log, gently placed it on the embers. The fire rose again, slow and golden. Hazel stood, took the blanket off her shoulders, and offered it back to Rowan. You should have it tonight, she said. Rowan didn't answer. She just reached out, took the blanket, and held it close. And for the first time since June's name was spoken aloud, no one looked away from the fire. The storm broke some time before dawn. By the time the fire dipped low and Jack stirred from his light sleep, the wind had stilled. Snow draped every window like a soft curtain. Light slipped in quietly, blue, clean, forgiving. Hazel was curled at his side on the rug, still wrapped in the extra blanket. Across the room, Rowan sat upright in a chair, not sleeping, just watching the fire. Jack gave her a nod. She nodded back, but Wren was gone. Not far at first. He found her just outside, standing beneath the tree with the carved initials R+J, half filled with snow. She didn't turn when he stepped out. It's still here, she murmured. Jack said nothing. There was nothing he could say she didn't already know. Wren looked up. Her eyes were clearer than before. It never stopped being home. That was the hard part. He waited. She turned to him, something like a smile on her lips. Take care of the fire, all right? Then she walked past him back into the cabin. By the time Hazel woke, Wren's coat was no longer by the door. Her cup, rinsed and dried, was on the shelf. On the table, a small brass key, cool to the touch. And beside it, a folded sheet of paper. Rowan was the one who opened it. Hazel sat beside her. Jack stood near the hearth, one hand resting absently on the mantel. The letter was short. You kept it warm. That's all she ever wanted. Let it be music again. Let it be laughter. Let it be someone else's safe place. The key is yours if you want it. Rowan folded the letter slowly, then looked at Jack. She means it. He nodded, quietly overwhelmed. Hazel touched the key. It fits the front door? Rowan smiled faintly. It fits the piano bench, too. There's a false bottom. With sheet music she never finished. Hazel's eyes lit up. Can we look? Jack looked at Rowan. Rowan looked toward the door Wren had walked through, then nodded. Yes, she said. Let's open everything she left behind. The snow was soft by midday, no longer violent, just deep and undisturbed, a wide white hush stretching between trees and time. Jack stepped outside first, boots crunching a slow path past the porch. Rowan followed a moment later, scarf wrapped loose around her neck, hands in her coat pockets. They didn't speak at first. There was no need. The world felt quieter after a storm. Like grief after it's run out of ways to shout, they moved together through the woods, past the tree with the initials RR+J. Past the old fence, now a gentle curve under snow. Jack held back a branch for her. Rowan nodded her thanks. Still no words. Only when they reached the small clearing, the one Hazel loved, did Rowan stop. She looked up. She used to stand here every winter just to listen. Jack looked around. The wind was gone. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. She said the snow had a sound, not falling, but after it landed, like silence with a memory inside. Jack nodded. Hazel says snow sounds like things you can't explain. Rowan smiled faintly. She's not wrong. A long pause. Then Rowan said quietly, I thought if I kept quiet long enough, the ache would fade. That silence was safer than saying the wrong thing. Jack looked at her. I thought if I said enough, maybe I wouldn't feel it. And did you? No. They stood there, the weight of that truth sitting between them like an old dog, familiar, tolerated, still too heavy. Rowan crouched and ran her gloved fingers through the surface of the snow. She said, barely audible, Wren blamed me. for not getting help sooner, for pretending everything was fine, for not telling her how bad June had gotten. Jack didn't respond right away. Then, gently, "Did you blame yourself too?" Rowan looked up. Her eyes were damp, not from cold. "I still do," she said. Jack looked at the trees, the ones June had stood beneath, the ones still holding sound. "I couldn't fix Hazel's mother," he said. "I tried. I stayed through the unraveling, through the yelling, through the forgetting, but I couldn't stop her from walking away." Rowan watched him. "And some nights," Jack added, "I still dream she comes back. Not for me, just to say goodbye properly." They both stood in that, the not fairness, the not knowing, the weight no one saw because it made no noise. Rowan finally whispered, "Do you think people come back? Somehow?" Jack hesitated, then, "I think sometimes they send someone ahead to finish what they couldn't." Rowan looked toward the cabin. "The girl," she said. Jack nodded. "She hears things we've forgotten how to." Rowan looked down at her hands. "I gave up music because it hurt too much without her." Jack said, "Maybe that's the only way it matters, if it hurts." Rowan breathed in, deep and quiet. Then softly, "See, will you stay?" Jack didn't answer right away. He watched the wind move through the branches like it was looking for a place to rest. Then he said, "I don't know what we are, but I think this place wants us here." Rowan smiled, and somewhere behind them from the cabin, the faintest sound of a violin string hummed through the still air. Hazel sat at the little table by the window, crayon box open, brows furrowed in quiet focus. The snow outside made everything glow brighter, cleaner, like the world had been wiped blank just for her. The paper in front of her wasn't new, soft at the corners, a little crinkled, but it would hold this moment, just like the cabin had held so many before it. She didn't hum, she didn't talk, she just drew. Rowan was curled in the corner chair, gently tuning the violin, only one full string left now. But it was enough. Jack sat on the floor beside the hearth, carving new kindling with careful hands. The fire crackled low, steady like it knew the rhythm of the room. Hazel's crayons moved. Brown for the log walls, orange for the fire, blue for the scarf Rowan always wore, and a soft gray to outline the edges of Jack's boots. She drew the four of them, small and quiet around the fire. No one looked directly at the viewer. They were all turned slightly inward toward each other, toward the warmth, like it was something they shared, not something to perform. She even drew June. Not her face, Hazel had only seen it in the photo, but a shadow of a woman outlined just behind the chair, one hand resting on the shelf where the violin used to be, watching, staying. And above the fire she drew the initials carved into a heart. H plus J plus R plus W. She colored it in with the deep red crayon, the one that was already short from use. When she was done, she didn't show it right away. Instead, she slid off the chair and padded over to Jack. "Dad," she said, "I made something." He looked up. "Yeah?" She held it out with both hands. He took the paper gently, his rough fingertips brushing the edge. He studied it for a long moment, lips parting slightly, eyes softening. Then he looked at her. "You drew us." Hazel nodded. "It's the cabin, but not the way it looks, the way it feels." Rowan stood slowly, came to look over his shoulder. When she saw the image, something shifted in her expression, like she'd just remembered a song she thought was lost. Wren, standing near the door, glanced over too. She didn't speak, but she smiled. The kind of smile that says, "I didn't expect to be in this picture, but I'm glad I am." Hazel looked around the room, then back at her drawing. "I think it's our house now," she said. No one corrected her. No one needed to. The fire crackled softly. And the cabin, for the first time in years, felt like it had 4 hearts beating inside it. Spring didn't arrive with fanfare. It came quietly like everything else in Pine Hollow. The snow didn't melt all at once. It faded slowly, leaving soft patches of earth and glistening puddles where drifts used to be. The wind lost its bite. The sun stayed longer. One morning, Hazel stood by the window staring at a patch of thawed soil just past the back steps. She turned to Jack. "Can I plant something?" He set down the mug he was drying. "Like what?" "A tree," she said. "A small one." He paused. "For who?" Hazel hesitated. Then, "For her." Jack didn't ask which her. He just nodded. Later that afternoon, Rowan and Wren helped them find the spot. Rowan carried a burlap-wrapped sapling, a young pine, not taller than Hazel herself. Its needles were soft, its roots tangled but strong. Jack handed Hazel the trowel. She crouched down beside the patch of earth and began to dig. Not hurried, not playful, just present. The others stood nearby, quiet. Rowan watched the motion of Hazel's hands, careful, certain, steady. Wren folded her arms across her chest, but her eyes were glassy. Jack crouched beside Hazel once the hole was ready, helping her lower the pine into place. Hazel patted the dirt gently around it, pressed both hands to the soil, closed her eyes for a moment, then stood. Rowan stepped forward, brushing a pine needle between her fingers. "She would have liked this," she said. Hazel looked up. "It'll grow big, right?" "If you keep it warm through winter," Rowan said, smiling. "Yes." Wren pulled a small copper tag from her coat pocket. Weathered, hand-stamped with one simple word, June. She tied it gently to one of the lower branches. Hazel whispered, "Now she won't be forgotten." Jack placed a stone at the base of the tree. Just one. Then all 4 of them stepped back. No speeches, no songs, just a little pine, standing watch behind the cabin, a new root in old ground, and a place to come back to, always. The fire was burning low, not because it was dying, just because it didn't need to roar anymore. It was evening now. Outside, the last light of spring filtered through the trees, casting long golden bars across the floorboards. Inside the cabin, the violin rested on the shelf again, new strings, polished wood. Quiet for now. Rowan sat in the big chair by the hearth, a worn shawl draped around her shoulders, fingers folded in her lap. Jack leaned on the table, half focused on the notepad in front of him, where he'd been copying the unfinished sheet music line by line, measure by measure, like he was helping rebuild something that once got lost mid-sentence. Hazel lay on the rug, stomach down, crayons spilled beside her, working on a drawing she refused to show anyone until it was done. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. They were all simply there, not waiting, not searching, just there. Then came the sound, a faint creak of the front door, not urgent, not timid, just present. Jack turned, and there she was, Wren, same coat, same quiet posture, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't knock this time, didn't speak. She stepped inside like she'd forgotten she ever left. In her hands, a thermos and 4 mismatched mugs wrapped in a towel. Rowan blinked once but didn't rise. Hazel looked up. "You came back." Wren gave the smallest of nods. Then, wordless, she walked across the room, set the mugs down, unscrewed the thermos. The scent of Earl Grey and pine rose into the room. She poured tea. No one said anything, not even a thank you, because somehow it was all already said. Wren handed one mug to Rowan, who accepted it without breaking eye contact. Another to Jack, who looked both surprised and unsurprised. Then she crouched beside Hazel and placed the last one gently by her elbow. Hazel grinned. "Is it the kind with honey?" Wren said softly. "Only if you believe it is." Hazel gave her a theatrical sniff. "It is." The girl took a sip, nodded, and turned back to her drawing. Wren stood and looked around. "The place smells different." Jack replied, We painted the back room. Hazel picked the color." "It's good," Wren said. "Smells like something new starting." Rowan asked, without looking away, "Are you staying?" Wren didn't answer directly. She pulled another log from the firewood stack, crouched and gently placed it into the hearth. The flame caught quickly, bright orange, familiar. Then she sat down, on the floor right between Hazel and Jack, cross-legged, as if she'd always been part of this room. Hazel glanced over. "Do you want to see the drawing?" she asked. Wren looked at her. "Only if it's done." Hazel flipped it around without another word. 4 figures drawn with bold wax strokes sat around a large orange fire. A pine tree in the background, a violin on the mantel, and above them simple letters encircled in gold crayon: J plus H plus R plus W. Wren stared, then nodded once, and smiled, not big, not wide, just enough to change the shape of her whole face. Jack took a sip of tea. "It's sweeter than I expected," Rowan said. "You get used to good things eventually." Hazel, already reaching for another crayon, murmured, "Especially if they come back." The fire popped gently. Outside, the wind moved through new leaves. Inside, no one said anything more, because no one needed to. The house finally was full. The envelope came by mail, no ceremony, no courier. Just a white envelope tucked between a grocery flyer and a folded hardware catalog at the edge of town, delivered by a man in a thick scarf who didn't ask questions. Jack opened it at the table mid-morning, with Hazel still in pajamas eating toast near the fire. Inside, a single-page legal, stamped, and a note in Wren's handwriting: "You kept it better than we ever did. Let it stay yours." At the bottom, her full name, her signature, and a date. Jack stared at it for a long time. Hazel looked up. "Is that the paper for the cabin?" He nodded once. "So, it's really ours?" He nodded again. Hazel grinned. "Can we paint my room next?" Jack exhaled softly, part laugh, part disbelief, and said, "We'll do the whole place." Later that afternoon, with the sun filtering in soft through the western windows, Jack climbed a short ladder and placed something above the hearth. Not a photo, not a mirror, just a frame. Inside, 4 words written in black ink on thick paper, the script slightly slanted Rowan's hand. "In the stillness we stay." It was a line June had once written in a margin of an unfinished composition. Hazel had found it folded between 2 old pages of sheet music. No title, no notation, just that single sentence, and somehow it had become the shape of everything they were building. Jack stepped down the ladder, looked up at it. Rowan stood nearby, arms crossed, gaze soft. "Think she'd approve?" he asked. "She would have rolled her eyes first," Rowan said. "Then she would have cried." Jack smiled. Hazel called from the back room. "Can I add a painting under it?" Rowan replied, "Only if you sign it this time." Jack looked around, at the table, at the shelves now half filled with food and books and someone's forgotten gloves, at the 4 mugs drying by the sink, at the pine tree out back, barely visible through the window, just a little taller than last week. He didn't say it aloud, but he thought, this is it, not the end, not the answer, but the stillness between storms, and the warmth that waits inside it. Jack didn't say much when he hung the frame above the hearth, just stepped back, looked at the fire, and whispered to himself, "In the stillness, we stay." Outside, the little pine tree swayed gently in the breeze. Inside, the violin waited on the shelf, no longer broken, just quiet. And in that quiet, something whole had taken root. If this story gave you even a small moment of peace, you can help it reach someone else by liking or subscribing. Thanks for staying till the end. See you by the fire next time.